There is a bird alive today that forgot how to fly not once, but twice. And the strangest part is that forgetting was not a mistake. It was the smartest thing this bird ever did. Picture a small brown and gray bird, about the size of a chicken, with a rusty red patch on its head and chest, and a white throat that gives it its name. It has short, stubby wings that look almost like an afterthought stuck onto a body built for running, not soaring. This is the Aldabra rail, and right now it is the last flightless bird left anywhere in the entire Indian Ocean. Every other species like it has gone extinct. But the story of how this one bird survived is stranger than almost anything else in the natural world, and almost nobody outside of a small circle of scientists in the Seychelles has ever heard it. To understand why this bird stopped flying, you have to understand something counterintuitive about evolution. Flight is expensive. Building big flight muscles, growing a large keel bone to anchor them, keeping feathers strong enough to survive the stress of getting airborne, all of that costs enormous amounts of energy. For a bird living somewhere with predators circling constantly, that cost is worth paying, because flying is the difference between living and being eaten. But take away the predators, and suddenly all that expensive machinery becomes dead weight. Evolution does not reward effort for its own sake. It rewards whatever burns the least energy while still keeping you alive long enough to reproduce. So on islands where there are no cats, no foxes, no snakes, no rats, birds that invest less in flying and more in things like stronger legs or bigger bodies start to win. Generation after generation, the wings shrink, the flight muscles waste away, and eventually the birds simply cannot get off the ground anymore. This has actually happened independently more than 1,000 times across the history of birds on islands around the world. It is why we have ostriches, emus, cassowaries, kiwis, penguins, and dozens of stranger, lesser-known examples that most people will never encounter. The Aldabra rail comes from a family called rails, which belongs to the same broader group as coots and moorhens. Rails are, for reasons scientists still find remarkable, extremely prone to losing flight. More than a quarter of all living rail species in the world are flightless, which is a staggeringly high number compared to any other bird family. Give a rail an island with no predators and enough time, and there is a real chance it will eventually stop flying altogether. About 100,000 years ago, give or take tens of thousands of years depending on which fossil layer you are reading, a flying bird called the white-throated rail left Madagascar and crossed the open ocean to a remote coral atoll called Aldabra, part of what is now the Seychelles, roughly 900 miles off the coast of East Africa. Aldabra was and still is one of the most untouched places on the planet. It has no permanent human population. It is made up of 4 large coral islands wrapped around a shallow lagoon, protected by a ring of reef, and it is so difficult to reach that it remained essentially free of human disturbance for almost its entire existence. When those first white-throated rails arrived, they found a paradise with no ground predators at all. Over time, following that same evolutionary logic, they lost the ability to fly. Their wings shrank, their legs grew stronger. They became fully adapted to a flightless life on the ground, foraging for insects, small reptiles, and whatever scraps of food they could find in the leaf litter. Then something happened that should have ended the story completely. Somewhere between about 118,000 and 136,000 years ago, global sea levels rose dramatically during an interglacial period, and the entire Aldabra Atoll disappeared underwater. Every single living thing on those islands was wiped out. The flightless rail, along with everything else that called Aldabra home, went completely extinct. For a long stretch of time, the atoll was nothing but open ocean, a graveyard of a lost ecosystem sitting quietly beneath the waves. Eventually, as the planet cooled again and sea levels dropped, Aldabra reemerged from the water as dry land once more. And this is where the story becomes almost unbelievable. Flying white-throated rails from Madagascar, descendants of the same population that had colonized the atoll the first time, made the same ocean crossing again. They landed on the newly reborn islands, found the same conditions waiting for them. No predators, abundant food, no reason to keep paying the energy cost of flight, and they began the exact same evolutionary process all over again. Within an estimated 20 to 30,000 years, a blink of an eye in evolutionary terms, they had once again lost the ability to fly, producing a bird that is, for all practical purposes, almost identical to the one that had gone extinct tens of thousands of years earlier. Scientists call this phenomenon iterative evolution, and it describes a situation where a species goes extinct and then a closely related population evolves along the exact same path, producing something nearly indistinguishable from what was lost. It has been documented in a handful of other organisms across deep geological time, but researchers who studied the Aldabra rail fossils, including paleontologist Julian Hume and his colleagues at the Natural History Museum in London, have called this the most compelling and best supported example of the phenomenon ever found in birds. As far as anyone has been able to determine, this is the only known case of a single bird species evolving flightlessness twice, going extinct in between on the same island. What makes this possible at all comes down to something fascinating about how flightlessness develops inside a bird's body. When researchers compare flighted birds to their flightless relatives, they find that the skeleton and the flight muscles are the first things to shrink and weaken. The keel bone, which anchors the massive muscles used for flapping, starts reducing almost immediately once flight becomes unnecessary. Feathers, on the other hand, change much more slowly, since maintaining feathers costs relatively little compared to maintaining an entire flight-ready skeleton. One researcher who studies this compared it to canceling an expensive monthly rent payment versus forgetting to cancel a small $5 subscription. The big, costly systems go first. This means that whatever underlying genetic and developmental pathway pushes a rail toward flightlessness seems to be primed and ready to activate quickly whenever the environmental pressure calls for it, which may explain how the same species could stumble into the same evolutionary outcome twice, separated by tens of thousands of years and a complete extinction event in between. The bird that exists today, officially known as Dryolimnus cuvieri aldabranus, is found only on Aldabra, nowhere else on the entire planet. It is a stocky, ground-dwelling bird with short legs built for running rather than the long legs of a wading bird, and it forages constantly through dense forest floor, scrubland, and mangrove edges, snapping up insects, small lizards, and other invertebrates. It is famously curious. Researchers and visitors describe it as bold and inquisitive, often approaching people or strange objects just to investigate whether they might be food. That boldness, which would have gotten it killed almost instantly on an island with real predators, is only survivable because Aldabra kept its promise of being predator-free, at least until humans changed that. And humans very nearly ended this bird's second chance at existence entirely. When people began visiting and briefly settling parts of Aldabra, they brought cats with them. Feral cats are devastating to ground nesting, flightless birds that have no instinct to fear a four-legged hunter, since none had existed in their evolutionary memory for tens of thousands of years. The rail was wiped out completely from two of Aldabra's four main islands, Grande Terre and Picard, and its population contracted down to just three remaining refugees, a large island called Malabar, a smaller island called Polymnie, and a tiny lagoon island called Îlot Cèdre. By the 1970s, the total population was estimated at around 8,000 birds, confined to a shrinking patch of an island system that once held them across its entire range. But this is also where the story turns into one of conservation success rather than tragedy. Once feral cats had died out on Picard Island naturally, conservationists with the Seychelles Islands Foundation saw an opportunity. In 1999, they captured 18 Aldabra rails from the surviving Malabar population and reintroduced them to Picard, hoping the birds could reclaim territory they had lost decades earlier. It worked far better than almost anyone expected. By 2012, the reintroduced population on Picard alone had grown to nearly 3,000 birds, and the total number of Aldabra rails across the entire atoll is now estimated at around 10,000 breeding pairs. A bird that had already gone extinct once, come back from nothing through a freak of evolutionary repetition, and then nearly been wiped out a second time by an introduced predator, clawed its way back from the edge yet again, this time with a little help. Today, Aldabra itself remains one of the most extraordinary and least visited places on Earth. It holds the largest population of giant tortoises anywhere on the planet, more than 100,000 of them, direct descendants of the ancient tortoise lineages that once roamed islands across the Indian Ocean before going extinct almost everywhere else. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site specifically because of how untouched it has remained, and it shelters other creatures found absolutely nowhere else, including the Aldabra brush warbler and the Aldabra drongo. The flightless rail shares its home with all of them, a living reminder of just how differently life can unfold when predators are simply taken out of the equation. The Aldabra rail is far from the only bird to give up flight in exchange for survival. New Zealand alone is home to an entire cast of flightless characters that evolved the same way, including the kakapo, an enormous nocturnal parrot that looks almost owl-like and can weigh more than 4 pounds, along with the takahe, the weka, and the iconic kiwi. The Galapagos has its own flightless cormorant, with wings so reduced they are barely more than decorative tufts of feathers. Mauritius, of course, had the dodo, a bird that became the most famous symbol of extinction on the planet after it lost its wings, and then met a predator it had no defenses against, in that case, humans themselves. What makes the Aldabra rail different from every one of these is not just that it lost flight, but that it lost it, vanished completely from existence, and then found its way back to the exact same evolutionary answer a second time on the same patch of coral in the middle of the ocean. There is something worth sitting with in that. This bird did not fail when it stopped flying. It succeeded twice at reading its environment correctly and adapting to exactly what that environment required. It gave up the sky because the ground had nothing left to fear. And when the ground itself disappeared beneath the waves, its lineage simply waited out on the wing until the ground came back, and then made the very same choice all over again. Survival here did not look like strength or speed or flight. It looked like knowing when to let something go. The next time you see a bird that cannot fly, whether it is an ostrich on a nature documentary or a chicken pecking around a farm, remember that flightlessness is not a design flaw. In the right conditions, on the right island, forgetting how to fly might just be the most intelligent decision evolution can make. And somewhere on a remote coral atoll in the Indian Ocean, a small brown and gray bird with a rusty red head is out there proving that point right now, walking quietly through the undergrowth, having already done the impossible not once, but twice.